If I was under $100,000 net worth, there are 6 steps that I would take to get there as fast as possible. Because $100,000 is the most important milestone on our way to financial freedom. Because after that, it just becomes easier. So let's dive right in. The first step that I would take is create a vision. Create a vision. And in fact, I call this the fuel to wealth vision. When I was starting out to save and invest, I actually didn't have that. I only knew that saving and investing is important because people have told me and I've read it in books, but I didn't really have a vision for my future. And because of that, now in hindsight, I was wandering around. So in a way, I was doing the right things, but still things moved very slowly. And the reason for that is because I didn't have a vision. I didn't really know where I was going. I didn't have a goal, not even a goal like the $100,000 net worth. And now that I think about it, a consequence of that was also that I didn't really have a way to measure what I was doing, right? So when you have something that you're working towards, then you kind of know where you are. But if you do not have that, then you're just moving, but you don't really know when you're going to be there because there is no there. Are you guys getting this? And that is why I called it fuel to wealth vision, because when you have a vision for your life, then this vision acts as fuel to do all the steps that it takes to get there. And then step number 2 is assess your status quo. So if I had to get to my first $100,000 again after I define the destination, the $100,000, what I would do is I would assess my status quo. And this simply means to figure out where exactly I'm standing right now. And I remember when I did this for the very first time, the clarity that gave me was just, it was amazing. And it also was completely unexpected. And it wasn't just clarity, in fact, it also was like a sense of control over my money. Do you know what I mean? So this is just a bunch of numbers that you figure out, 4 numbers to be exact. And by the way, I didn't figure out all of my numbers at once because I just didn't know about it. So I started out by tracking my income and expenses. And this was already an absolutely great insight. And it was my very first step, actually, even though I would not recommend it as first step. Right now, if I had to do it over, I would start with the vision. So income and expenses, but we don't stop there. We also figure out what we own, so our assets, and what we owe, our debt. And those are at the same time the 2 numbers, how we can calculate our net worth right now. And this is the thing that I have only found out much, much later. So this step requires some work, but it's easy and it's simple because it's just figuring out your numbers, right? And in fact, I've already made a video about the 4 numbers you need to know. I'll link it up here. And then once you've done this step, you know exactly where you are, right? You know exactly where you're starting from. And then step number 3 is set your goal. I also call this money game plan, which is why I'm going to put it in brackets. All right, now let me explain. Just in case you wonder, we already created our vision. Why are we setting goals now, right? But the vision is actually the greater picture. It's the greater picture of your life and what direction in general you want to move towards. But a goal, and this is the goal I'm talking about here in step 3, is a very specific thing, a very specific step on your way to your vision, right? And actually the very first thing that I would do here is to write it down. Because writing down your goal actually makes it 40% more likely that you reach the goal compared to when you do not write it down. Isn't that crazy? For a simple action of taking pen and paper and writing the goal down, which takes like 10 seconds, and this can make the difference of retiring a millionaire or not. Absolutely crazy. Okay, here's how I would do that. I would write, I have, and that is, I would put the words into a simple present because it seems like our mind has a more difficult time with past and future than it has with presents. But when you put your words into the present tense, then it's like your head tries to make it reality. So I would write, I have a net worth of 100,000 and then whatever your currency is by the end of, and then set a deadline. Now the deadline is very important because besides the vision we already created that gives us a measure With the deadline, we add urgency. And for this, it doesn't even matter if you make it to the deadline or if you don't. If you don't make it to the deadline, you just set a new one. But if we don't set a deadline at all, it's so easy to find another excuse and another excuse, right? At least that's what happened to me. I don't earn enough money. I have something coming up. No, I'll start after this certain thing. And then at the end, we forget about it. And maybe we remember like a few months or a few years later. And then we already missed out on so much. In fact, I just listened to a book from Brian Tracy. It's called Master Your Time, Master Your Life. And there he said a sentence that just came to my mind. It was, there are no unreasonable goals. There are only unreasonable deadlines. And this is something I just learned myself actually, because I used to beat myself up if I missed the deadline, like deadlines for my personal goals. But actually, when you think about it, the important thing is that you get it done. And if you miss this by a couple of weeks or a couple of months, I mean, who cares? The danger here of the alternative, which is not having a deadline, is to not get anything done at all, right? So we're setting goals that we know exactly what the next step is, so that we have a game plan, a money game plan. Especially when you're starting from 0 to 100,000. This can be a high goal, right? It can be overwhelming, and it also can seem so complicated, like almost unreachable, which it's not, of course. But that is why breaking this down into small sub-goals, this is what makes your whole journey achievable. And like I said, it also makes it crystal clear what the next step is. Okay, and then once we set our goals, we continue with step number 4, and that is build your infrastructure. So what do I mean by infrastructure? By infrastructure, I mean all the different accounts that you have. When I was starting out, for example, I only had one account. I had one checking account. Okay, not true. I also had some savings accounts that my mom had put up for me. But let me say it like this. In my awareness, I had one checking account. But that's actually not the smart way to build wealth. Because if we want to build wealth, then we need to separate our life right now. So where we spend all that money, on housing and on food and on stuff. And the wealth side, where we create financial freedom for us. In fact, I just made a video about this framework, life side and wealth side, because I hope it really simplifies, our thinking in terms of money. So to only have one checking account, which is basically taking care of the life side, it's not a good way to build wealth, especially not an efficient one, because we want to be tax efficient, right? We also want to let our money work for us. And so in this 4th step, building your infrastructure, you'd really take a close look at your accounts. And if you don't have them yet, you open accounts for the wealth side. This can be opening up a high yield savings account for your cash reserve, for example. It can also mean to open up a retirement account if you haven't already, to start investing there with tax benefits. So in this step, it's just very important that we separate accounts for the life side and accounts for the wealth side. All right, and then step number 5 is define your rules. Define rules, because if you really think about it, it's not enough to just create the accounts. In fact, that just happened to me. I had created a certain type of investment account and I had put some money there long time ago. But ever since that time long ago, I haven't put any money there. And then it was growing because the return was good. But what had happened is I had failed to define a rule. A rule like, okay, this amount of money goes into this specific investment account once a month. And so unless you define rules, the accounts to be created will not do you any good, right? So you define rules to fill up those accounts. And because the first 100,000 is such an important goal, and it's also the hardest to reach, if I was under 100,000, I would set very strict rules. Like this percentage of an amount of money is the absolute maximum that I can do right now. And I know it's a bit uncomfortable, but I will put it towards my wealth accounts so that I reach this goal of $100,000 fast. And additionally to that, I even push myself to find some more savings potential. And this doesn't even have to be complicated. This can be look through your subscriptions, optimize your grocery shopping, or optimize shopping in general. Things like that. And even if it's very small, even if it's $1 or $5 here or there or $10, it doesn't matter. In this phase, and I would argue even in the phase that comes after that, after the 100,000, 100,000. Every little amount counts. And I want you to always remember, this is not forever. It's not forever, because you will reach a point where you do not have to worry about money at all. And how I would do this, or to be more exact, how I do this, is I set the first milestone. This could be, for example, if you're not there yet, the first $10,000. And then I celebrate that milestone. So I do something to treat myself that I reached this milestone. And then after that, I set a new one. I set a new milestone. And then step number 6 is you accelerate your wealth. Now, what do I mean by accelerating your wealth? And I'm going to be honest with you. Saving yourself to $100,000 net worth will be tough. And what I mean by saving would be, for example, to put this money into a savings account. Even though right now you can earn decent money on a savings account, what we really want to do is we want to accelerate what we put onto our wealth side by investing it. And I want you to imagine investing like you on a bike going uphill trying to reach this goal of 100,000, and investing it, suddenly someone behind you pushes you forward, right? Or pushes you upward. Because even though on the way from 0 to 100,000, what you actually gain on your investments will not be these huge amounts. But here again, even the small amounts count, especially if it's amounts from the return you get on your investments that you did not have to put in there yourself, right? So you can imagine this, you put in this, and then the return, you gain something extra, right? So red is what you put in, and green is the return you get on your investments. And in the beginning, this might be small, but it doesn't matter. It's still, not you having to do all the work. And over time, this will get better and better, because at some point this will be a little bit more and a little bit more. And the really crazy part is when you actually let it sit there for decades. So your return over time will get more and more. And this is why it's so important to keep filling it up, right? And to also let it work for you. And what will happen after decades is that you will only have put in a very little amount actually, and the return on your investment will be much bigger than what you actually put in. Isn't that great? Those 6 steps, by the way, are exactly the way that I structured my course. It's called the Automated Wealth System. It is a 6-week course where we go through those 6 steps every week, which is the fastest way to set yourself up for financial success. When you're interested in that and you want to learn more, you can check out the link below. And now I wish you all the best of luck on your journey to 100,000 net worth. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.